This episode is sponsored by Active 911, a respected leader in the emergency communication and software field, providing alerting, mapping, and scene resources for over 500,000 first responders worldwide. Now, as you know, I only bring sponsors on this show who are A, coming from an altruistic place, and B, truly bringing solutions to problems. And the origin story of Active 911 begins with volunteer firefighter and tech entrepreneur Joseph Sullivan. After missing a critical call from a dispatch error, Joseph set out to create a solution to ensure that we are not only dispatched on time, but also provide us with resources and information for the call and location. So there are 3 different products under the Active 911 umbrella. The first is Active Alert, a dispatch system integrated into a CAD connection, providing fast, reliable alerting, maps, data, pre-plans, hydrant locations, and even the locations of incoming units and their specialties. The second arm is Active Comms. Now, many of us have experienced problems when it came to communication using our traditional radios, so Active 911 found a way of tapping into the incredible capabilities of modern-day smartphones and integrate that into our communication, providing both increased range and low latency. So to learn more about Active 911 or to try their free trial, go to active911.com. And if you want to hear more about the origin and spectrum of products that they offer, listen to episode 1243 of the Behind the Shield podcast with the creator and founder, Joseph Sullivan. This episode is sponsored by yet another incredible company that I stand behind fully, and that is Bubs Naturals. Now, I've not only used Bubs products for 4 years now, but I've also had the founder, Sean Lake, on the show twice. And they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, 20% off your entire order, and I will give you that code in a moment. Now, Bubs has a very powerful backstory. Glenn Bub Doherty is one of the 2 Navy SEALs killed protecting the CIA facility in Benghazi. And wanting to honor his best friend, Sean stood up this company. Now, it began with their flagship product, which is their collagen. And I have to say, as a Brit with really dry skin who's now 51, I cannot underline the importance of collagen in your diet. I have seen a huge positive impact on my skin, nails, hair, and most importantly, digestive system. Another thing that I use religiously is their MCT creamers. That's the part of coconut oil that is good for our brain. And they come in dairy and non-dairy, depending on your diet. Now, I started taking Bub's latest product, creatine, about 3 months ago. And that was primarily because it's been proven to improve cognition and brain health. But not only did I witness that, I also saw an improvement in my performance, my lean muscle mass, and even a reduction in inflammation and sports injury pain. Now, in addition, Bubs makes apple cider vinegar gummies, vitamin C, and their hydration product, Hydrate or Die. And several of these products are also NSF certified, which is the highest level of certification as far as efficacy and cleanliness. Now, one of the most important elements of this company, in my opinion, is that they are a social business, meaning 10% of their profits go to charity, and in this case, that is the Glenn Doherty Foundation. Now, as I mentioned before, they are offering you, the audience of the Behind the Shield podcast, 20% off your entire order if you use the code BTS at bubsnaturals.com. And if you want to hear more about the products, the backstory, and how Sean used Glenn's story to help other veterans, listen to episodes 558 and 1055 of the Behind the Shield podcast. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran police officer, SWAT team leader, and television personality, Kory Flowers. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his childhood in North Carolina, his journey into policing, crack cocaine, the opioid crisis, his powerful perspective on addiction, the power of mentorship, dealing with the loss of one of his own, police on television, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Kory Flowers. Enjoy. Well, Kory, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
You got it, pal. I appreciate the invite. I tell anybody these days, anybody that's cheerleading our profession, the first responder craft, I'm a big fan. So I appreciate it, pal. Thank you for the invite very much.
Yeah, well, thank you. Where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
Yeah, so we're in the United States on the East Coast in the Tar Heel State, which is North Carolina, to be distinguished completely from South Carolina. This is the more cultured of the Carolinas, in my estimation. We're in Greensboro. We're in Greensboro, which is dead in the middle of our state. This is the third largest state in the city. We've got about 320,000 citizens or so. So I'm coming to you from the Greensboro Police, pretty decent sized agency. We've got about 620 cops or so. That's where we're at.
How far are you from Asheville? Because I've been there. I've been to Chimney Rock and some of those areas.
Yeah.
I know that's kind of that direction, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah. 3-hour drive right down Interstate 40. Asheville is beautiful. Is one of the stars of the state. But yeah, Greensboro is a neat spot because in about 3 hours I can drive east and be standing in the Atlantic Ocean, or in 3 hours I can drive west and be standing in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Asheville. So yeah, we're right in the middle, sweet spot.
Well, with that being said, obviously your state was hit particularly hard with the floods, a few months ago. I know that was probably, again, as you said, further west, but talk to me about that event through your eyes, because I know it was something that no one was expected, the kind of weather that hadn't been seen for centuries.
Yeah, it was strange too, because, North Carolina, we're very used to hurricanes affecting our coast, of course, because we have the famous Outer Banks and the barrier islands there. We're used to that, and we prepare for hurricane weather even as far inland as Greensboro. But that storm Helene was unique in that it went inland and our coast was spared, but 6 hours from the coast, Asheville, Boone area got hammered. We sent a contingent of our folks, like every agency did, within driving distance to the relief efforts, because it was biblical destruction. I mean, the kind of destruction you can't explain. A lot of swift water rescue going on, a lot of unaccounted for people even. I mean, our guys were going up there and finding, unfortunately, bodies in trees, which is something you don't even, it sounds like just a bad movie, but it was one of those efforts where it took legitimately all hands on deck. And when I say that part of our state is still not recovered, I mean, that's not an understatement. So here's a point. The interstate was washed out between here and Tennessee for months. I mean, when and think about what that creates, but you had all of the, rescue efforts. And then you had all the, our guys were protecting stores from looting, and you had, opportunists coming in trying to take advantage of people's bad fortune. So it was a tough chapter, but as always, like we always see, and you see it on your side of the house, anytime there's great tragedy, you also see the light is very contrasted. And so you see the best of humanity banding together to help folks out. So that was a tough chapter, man, but we trudged through it. It was a challenge.
One of my favorite reports from right after that incident, it reminds me again of the kind of 9/12 philosophy that a lot of people talk about, was the Amish communities that were close there, were some of the
Mm-hmm.
first people rebuilding homes right off the bat. So you talked about the kindness and compassion. If you want to elaborate, what were some of the stories that came out of that tragedy?
Yeah, I mean, you would see, you see a lot of, capitalism is a beautiful thing, but it also creates a lot of competition, and we're used to that, especially in America. That's a big deal. But something like that levels the playing field. I mean, you had folks. Think about this. You had folks with beautiful, effectively mansions riverside in outside of Asheville, some of the most pricey real estate in our state, and then the hurricane moved the river. In a lot of cases, people lost their property because the entire river was rerouted. So a few miles away from that guy experiencing that kind of loss, you had folks living like we do some places in our state in true shanty setups. But the day after the hurricane, everybody's on level playing field, and everybody's needing water. Right? I mean, things that we take for granted. Everybody's needing, gasoline just to get to town. Everybody's needing tarps to cover their roofs, and so it really is it gives you an idea of how a lot of times how ungrateful we are, and how we take things for granted, and something like that removes all that pretense. There's no room to take anything for granted when the millionaire and the third generation farmer are both looking for water or looking for shelter, trying to get food to them. Our guys, we have a lot of different special teams in our agency. We have an ATV team, all terrain vehicles. These guys are, on the four wheelers and can go places that cars and vehicles can't go. And they were, roads did not exist. I mean, whole roadways systems were washed away, never to be seen again. And so these guys were shuttling water, shuttling food back deep into the backcountry, taking folks food. And so, our guys came back exhausted, worn out, filthy. They were staying in hotels with no power, no water. Our guys got deployed, and they were taking Mountain House freeze-dried camping meals and cases of water to sustain themselves for days and days. So yeah, you hear about that, and it's in an ironic way very encouraging to watch them come back with those stories. Definitely will reorient you to the world. No longer is the Wi-Fi being slow on your flight to New York. No longer is that a big deal. It really does get you back in line with reality.
Absolutely. When you hear about, for example, Puerto Rico being flattened by the hurricanes and some of these other disasters that we've had, when the news cycle revolves and they're on to the next thing, a lot of times, these communities are still struggling. They're still rebuilding, a year, 2 years later.
That's right.
What are the needs in North Carolina at the moment? And because I know there's a very polarizing conversation about money being spent militarily in other countries versus the needs of the American people. Are there examples of deficits from the federal side within that state specifically that need to be heard?
Yeah, and you're asking a cop a question that's far beyond my expertise and pay grade, but I'll give you my 2 cents because that's what we get to do here. So, I mean, for instance, you have all of the basic vital things taken care of now, but there are. I mean, here's a good example. My church, a couple of our kids, we've got 3 teenagers at home. A couple of our kids will be going to Waynesville, North Carolina, this summer to continue with some rebuilding efforts. I mean, if you think about just entire towns, entire cities where every structure was impacted or damaged or destroyed, you got people. Nobody's sitting in the rain anymore, and we're able to get water and food to where we need to go. But there's constantly patch up jobs that need to happen, and like you said. Unfortunately, things like things like Katrina, years ago, they remind us that if your great plan is that the government is going to protect you, sustain you, care for you, it's not a good plan. You should have a backup plan at least. But that's a good reminder. But again, it's neat. Like what the government is not able to do or is not equipped or, to deploy quickly enough. Neighbors and the folks almost always fill in those gaps. So again, I don't mind at all the what are we doing wrong conversation, but I always tend to look like, well, what is going? Something's always going right. look for where are the helpers. Look for the helpers. What are they doing? And that'll almost always encourage your soul. So that's fun to see. You see a lot of the, like I said, faith-based organizations continually not forgetting that this is not over. This is a long trek.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those two can exist simultaneously. I mean, the community, it takes a village mentality is what was lost when everything was going well, when everyone was enjoying their creature comforts. And it's a reminder when we have an emergency. But, there's also a responsibility of some of these larger organizations that we pay a lot of money through our taxes to be prepared and to take care of people, not just, the 911 response, but the months and years after to help the community get back on their feet.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I say that a lot. The older I get, I constantly think about my tax dollars. My guys here in Vice Narcotics, I'm always, I live here in the city, which is kind of unique for a guy that's been doing this long. So I live and serve in the same city. So in a lot of ways, I always say, look, I get to complain from two different angles, right? I get to complain because I'm an employee of this machine, but I also live here. Like I pay part of my and your salary. And so, yeah, when I drive over a lot of potholes in my city, I dislike that because what's being done with my money? And further, that's speaking culturally, that's a very American thing to do to look, what are you doing with my money? What are you doing with our taxes? So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing, I don't know if you find this too, when you are a firefighter or a cop or a paramedic and you are expected to operate at an extremely high level, arguably sometimes in an environment that doesn't exactly create, a high level of performance. I mean, you're doing it sleep deprived and, mandatory overtime, all these kind of things. I think our community then expects the same in return. From the people in the government and the people that are working in other branches of the community, because no one will accept a subpar for performance from a police officer or a firefighter. So I think actually it's an important voice to listen to because they're the ones walking the walk when they're expected to operate at this level. So we expect, for example, our politicians to operate with the same performance and ethics.
No, you're right, and that's a high bar. That's a heavy yoke to carry. But it's also the challenge that we signed up for, right? You sign up to be on the fire truck. I sign up to be in the police car, wearing the shield in public. You are the most visible, in my face representation of your local government. And so, you make that encounter with your, we'll call them your customers, right? Your citizens. Those are the people we serve. You make those encounters pleasurable. Even the challenging stuff when your guys in your side of the house are putting out a house fire where everything's been lost, right? You can still, the way that you interact with those folks in such tragedy really can make a significant impact in their lives. I mean, even I tell our guys, we almost never have to be, we don't need to be in a position to be unkind, right? That's not necessary. That's not ever part of the job. You represent, in our case, the city of Greensboro, right? The state of North Carolina. You're the face of that. So take that with the proper gravity, I would say.
Absolutely. Well, let's go back to the very beginning of your journey then. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Sure. So I was born in a small town called Madison, North Carolina, 2,500 people or so. It's about 30 miles north of our city here. I grew up on a gravel road. True story, which is deep. I mean, it's part of how I'm built. I mean, I'm from the countryside, right? Grew up. I didn't wear a shirt a lot. We were in the woods all the time, playing all manner of sports. My family still lives there. My mom and dad are still there. My only sister, is 2 years younger than me. She grew up to be a nurse. She was a labor delivery nurse for about a decade, and now she's a school nurse. At several schools where a couple of her kids go, actually. So we grew up there, kind of an idealistic childhood. Again, growing up with a lot of freedom, dirt bikes in the woods. Again, I played football and tennis growing up and dabbled in other sports that I wasn't as proficient in. Came up through the rank, had a couple of part-time jobs through the years. My dad always made sure that I got a heavy dose of taking responsibility, being productive to the world. He had an allergy to excuses, like I do now. We don't do excuses. We don't say I can't. We just say, I'm having trouble. I need some help, and that's okay. But never I can't. Mowed a bunch of yards growing up for money. That was one of my first jobs, and then worked at a grocery store and all manner of silly jobs in between. I graduated in '95 and went to college at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I've got my logo back here, so I am a Tar Heel. I'm a lifelong fan there, and then moved upon graduation in '99 is when I started the police academy here in Greensboro. So I tell, when I hang out with the young folks a lot, doing a lot of training in our police academies, and I tell them, look, I started in the 1900s. I started in the 20th century. It was '99, but I get to say that, and that sounds pretty cool. And that's the start of this chapter, and that's the way I kind of view everything. Everything's a chapter, right? Just, life doesn't have just a beginning and an end and an abrupt shift and a retirement and then it's over. No, it's all just chapters. It's a story, and this is a chapter, which has been a fun chapter so far.
What did your parents do as far as occupation?
Yeah, my dad was a lifelong supervisor and manager in telecom. So he worked for various phone companies as they changed names throughout the year. My dad is a true leader of folks. My dad's the guy that, when a situation like Helene comes through, my dad's the guy that you would look to and say, Steve, what do we do? What's the next step? We have no idea. My dad is also from North Carolina. He was drafted into the military during Vietnam and served a time there, and came back and immediately took that job with telecom, which he did for 42 years. But he's the guy that you follow. He's the guy that I've got a plan. Relax, calm down. We're going to be fine. Take a breath, look around, make a call. My mom was a homemaker. Effectively, she had a couple different jobs throughout the year, throughout our upbringing, part-time gigs. But her role, that she loved, was being with us, raising us, leading the home, having my house was home base for all of my heathen friends, and we hung out at my house, and our house was a place to be because it was cool. And my parents respected my friends, but also they knew, that this is a place where order and fun can coexist. My parents opened a bookstore for a couple of years. When I was in 5th and 6th grade, my parents took in 3 exchange students while we were growing up. So I had a German sister, a Spanish brother, and a Spanish sister while I was growing up. And again, these things were very, very courageous and very forward thinking. Again, this is a dirt road in a very rural town in North Carolina. And we brought, Spanish friends and siblings and a German sister into our house. And my parents opened a bookstore in not a super literate area. That's very, neat, courageous things that frankly, I would never have had the courage to do. But that's where I'm from. So we have a very literate household. I grew up shooting guns and reading books, and that's kind of where I'm from.
When it comes to the Vietnam generation, in contrast to experience that a lot of people had in the World War II era, even though not everyone came home to a ticker tape parade, they were at least welcomed home. There was an admiration for their service. You have the Vietnam generation where there's all these horror stories, how they were received so poorly and spit on and pissed on and all kinds of stuff. I've heard the stories personally, which, as we understand the entire kind of mental health conversation now, we understand the kind of organizational betrayal from the country, and then also the moral injury that probably caused a lot of our veterans. Have you had any conversations with your father about his time in Vietnam and his transition?
Yeah. So my dad's case was, my dad was drafted. So, and I've talked to him about that, and it's such a, we have effectively an entirely volunteer military at this point. Anybody that's a professional military personnel now made that choice. And that's, probably as it should be in case, unless in case of emergency, like we determined Vietnam to be. My dad was 18, and he told me these stories. He said every Sunday night was the lottery on TV. Think like a bingo, ping pong ball lottery. And you have your birth date, and that is, it's effectively your number. And so he said he remembers being 18, sitting in the living room beside his brother and his parents, and they were all just watching, hoping they didn't get the number. And then you did, and then that's it. You don't have an option. My dad was fortunate in a way in that his draft card, he was taken to a nuclear missile base in Germany to effectively support the invasion. That's when the beginning of the standoff that became the Cold War with the Soviet Union was going on at the same time. So during the intense fighting in Vietnam, he was sent to Germany with a Patriot missile base. So he got to experience that. He was in for 21 months or so as an 18 and 19-year-old, and then came home. Dad and I have spoken about this at length. I think everybody is wired differently, right? You see this in the fire service, you see this in the police service. There are folks that are built to manage that kind of trauma and different levels of what can become PTSD. But again, I think I gave a pretty decent portrait of my dad earlier. He is he's a patriot. He determined even at 18 and that this is what you do. I don't have a choice. This is what you do. I've been called by my country. I'm going to go and I'm going to do my best. He was promoted to a sergeant before he was honorably discharged. But, my dad's not the type to ever wear, he doesn't wear Army ball caps, and there's no Army stickers on our vehicles. You wouldn't know it. He has his uniform still in his locker, or it's still in his closet, which probably almost fits, which is pretty cool. And he'll speak about it at length, but it's not something that he's ever going to interject. He doesn't hold a grudge against the cause or the political maneuverings. He sees it kind of like, I think a very healthy way to see that kind of service is, this is just part of the responsibility of living in what we believe is an extremely great country. And we'll go, I'll do my best, and I'll leave when I'm not needed. And that's how he had digested it. And again, I think that's a very fortunate story. And it's cool that I'm proud of that as part of my legacy for sure.
What about the telecommunications side? Again, conversations with your father. There must have been such an incredible evolution through his eyes from the hardwired, phones of the 1900s as we experience as kids through to this crazy innovation that we have in our hand today.
Yeah, my dad, I was very used to my dad growing up. If there was a nasty thunderstorm or ice storm coming, we just knew my dad was going to be gone for a couple of days because, it would tear down trees and rip down power, phone lines. And he took that job as seriously as he probably took his military time and his career there. It's like, look, he would always think through the eyes of the most vulnerable. So, rural in his area of responsibility, in his mind, there's some little old lady who's by herself that lives on that mountaintop that does not have connection to the world right now. That's a big deal. And so he would dispatch his folks and, they'd come back when, it was restored effectively, it was great for me to watch because, when everybody else, I didn't have great aspirations in law enforcement or anything else where when stuff gets bad, you go out. But I saw my dad doing that. I'd see my dad, in the ice storms and the hurricanes and in the storms, like he was out there working, and he'd pop back in and get a sandwich and get back at it. Sweaty, tired, worn out, mud on his pants coming in, even as the boss, as the supervisor, he was doing the right thing along with them as a force multiplier. I learned that from watching my dad. Just because you're a boss, you're first and foremost a force multiplier. Do not forget that. That's really important. So that was neat. But yeah, the evolution, man. I remember my dad got access to some of the first cell phones, and we had he brought one of those bag phones home that you plugged in to to your car lighter, and you dialed, and it was like 25 cents a minute. And you remember it was ridiculous at first. And my dad's like, keep this in the car. This is how it works. Very quick conversations. That's all we're going to have, but this is going to come. And then I remember in the early 90s, he started talking about they're going to one day have cameras in phones. And I remember thinking back then, like, what a weird pairing. Like, why would you put a camera in a phone? What's the similarity? And, we had those conversations early on. And then, yeah, he watched the rotary phones go away to the dial phones, to the bag phones, to the smaller cell phones and smaller cell phones. So it's interesting, man. He's got a very engineering mind that's good for that. But like I said earlier, primarily my dad's just a leader of folks, and he was always into leadership and management of folks, caring for the folks.
I can't remember the exact quote, but George Orwell talked about, that ultimately the man, won't be listening through your phone. You'll be putting all the information out yourself. And my God, you nailed it.
He did. Nailed it. You're exactly right. That's how terrifying is that? But yeah, that's the national pastime.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then you mentioned about joining law enforcement. Prior to that, in those formative years, had you had any positive or negative experience with law enforcement? And then either way, what made you decide to go down that road?
Yeah, so I would, I'm from a small town, so small police department. But this is what's interesting. When I was, I mentioned that bookstore. My parents owned a bookstore in our small downtown. So if you think about like any old Disney movie with a neat little downtown, old Southern downtown, that was our downtown. A couple streets, 5 or 6 stoplights, some storefronts, and I would go after school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. I'd go from school, and I would get dropped off at our bookstore until it closed at 5, and then we'd go home with mom and dad. But I had a bike that I kept downtown, and in my mind, I was I guess a pretty typical young man, in that I grew up with, G.I. Joes, superheroes, good versus evil, protectors versus the villains. I mean, just very clear, and I would ride that bike in our downtown. Again, I'm from a gravel road a couple of miles outside of town, but downtown Madison, that's metropolis, right? And so I would in my mind patrol those dangerous streets, where there was no crime, but patrol those streets with shoppers and the old ladies and people coming to our bookstore and the flower shop and the coffee shop. And in my mind, I was caring for the city, like I was protecting the streets. Fast forward about 25 years, I found myself as a sergeant over a bike squad in Greensboro, actually riding a bike, protecting folks. And it's just interesting how a lot of times your early experiences, can mirror what you get into. So I think I have a very keen sense of justice. Like, it's probably one of my top personality traits is a sense of justice. So I've always pursued that. But I honestly fell into this career almost accidentally. I got towards the end of college and didn't, like a lot of folks, didn't have a great plan. Honestly, I just had been enjoying my college time. And I got to the last semester or so of college, and this is what I came up with, which is a great idea. I applied to a Baptist seminary. I applied to the police department here, and I was investigating. It was the election year for the mayoral race in my hometown. And I had been a political science major. So my third option in my mind, I was going to move home, run for mayor, and begin a career in politics. That was the vision. And I said, well, we'll do whichever one of these kind of works out first or starts to come into focus. And I got a call back from the police department here. And I said, well, I'll do police work. I think that sounds neat. I've seen all the movies. I've seen the TV shows. I'll do that until it's not fun. And when it's not fun, again, it's a chapter, and that's okay. I'll go do something else. And now you fast forward, that was 27 and a half years ago. And to this day, James, I think this is the best job. I say that all the time. People think I'm joking. This is the coolest job in the world. And I hope everybody can say that about your career, but I truly love this job. I like locking up bad guys to this day. I got that 9-year-old, vision, I think. So that's kind of how I found myself here, which is kind of weird to think about.
Well, you mentioned being from a small town, Madison. Now you find yourself in Greensboro. I grew up on a farm in England, and when I first went to my first apartment, Hialeah, very, very urban section of Miami. There was a lot of poverty there, a lot of desperation, a lot of crime.
Sure.
So very different than wrangling sheep in the West Country. Yeah. So there was kind of a culture shock there, and I got to really see behind the curtain of, a lot of these communities around the world that most people don't see. Did you have that kind of aha moment as you kind of emerged from the academy?
Yeah, our academy is police academies are pregnant. It was 7 months or so. And so, you're learning. And, again, I remember in my hometown, again, there's, one way into town. It's very easy to navigate. One of the things before GPS, they would give us a road directories and maps. And so, you get dispatched to a hot police call. You want to be, going there with quickness, but you don't have any idea which direction that is early on. So you break out, I tell the young folks now, you would break out a spiral bound road directory and you'd look up the road name by alphabet, and then it would give you a grid and a page. And you take that and correlate it to this big Rand McNally looking city map, and you'd have to figure out how to get there. And I am directionally challenged big time. I'm not good with, which way is north. I can't tell you. I know which way Chick-fil-A is, but I don't know north, south, east, west. I'm not sure. And so, yeah, like things like that, things like, just the idea that in this city we have 4 distinct police substations. Each one is policing a section of our town far larger than my hometown. Like that's nuts. 600 cops where I come from. I think there was 9 police officers that were caring for Madison back in the day. So yeah, you do really get, in our town, we've always had, unfortunately, like 1.2, 1.3 shootings a day, just normal urban stuff, but nothing like that in small hometowns like you and I came from. So yeah, it is kind of a shock, and it's from guys like us from the dirt roads. It's very exciting, and that's where you want to police. I mean, I love it.
I know you're in the vice area now. When you first entered the profession, what were some of the biggest challenges, whether it was specific crimes or whether it was street drugs at the time?
Yeah, I think overall. So, and I've talked about this in hindsight. I didn't realize at the time that this was a challenge, but I, like a lot of young folks, I think, come into this career specifically, and at 22 years old, I saw the world very polarized, black and white, good and evil. I represent good and justice, of course, and everybody that I'm going to arrest in my career is evil and different than me and wrong. And that's the way, I don't know how we coach young folks out of that mindset, but it's pretty normal, to have that kind of real overly zealous view of the world. And now, I think about that now over the course of the last 27 years, that has tempered a lot in me. And today, I mean, my view of the world overall is, at present, from what I've experienced, evil exists. Evil's in the world. Anybody that says it does not is truly ignorant or just has been sheltered and should be grateful. Evil exists, but it's not super common. I've seen it. You've seen it, James, but it's not super common. The vast majority of criminals in our case that we deal with, a lot of them are just panicky folks or folks that made a bad decision or two, probably, maybe had a crappy home life, not much support, came on hard times, right? And now at 49 years old, I truly look at folks, and it's just a great deal of compassion. And I do realize that we're all the same. And if not for a couple bad decisions or a couple bad turns of fate, I could be that person, right? I could be in that same situation doing that same thing. And I've learned that over time. But I think that was a challenge starting, even though I didn't realize it, because I would, a guy hooked on crack, I'd kind of look down at him. And that's not right. That's not true. That's not accurate. And it's not helpful, honestly. Creates an us versus them type of mentality. And that's never helpful, not in politics, not in policing, not anywhere. So I think that was, honestly, if I could zoom back and tell myself something early on, I would tell myself, look, we're all the same. These are just human beings. You'll see some evil, but you won't see it every day, thankfully. But you'll see just people making bad decisions. Sometimes those are crimes. So that I've thought about that a lot. I've written about that quite a bit recently. It's interesting.
I had the superintendent of Bastøy prison, which is just off the coast of Oslo in Norway. Mm. And their prison model, which is actually argued as the most effective with the lowest recidivism in the world, is you commit a crime, you lose your freedom, you go to a place where other people who lost their freedom have been. But this island is like a housing community. The prisoners live together, they cook, they clean, they go to school, they go to work. And their philosophy is 95, 96% of prisoners will move back into your neighborhood one day. So do you want a guy that was locked in a box that had to fight for survival? Or do you want someone who was truly rehabilitated? And just like you said, someone that was given a second chance, that made a mistake, that was a product of their environment, that was allowed, to turn a corner, as it were. And their guards don't have any weapons. They've had basically all but no prison on prison fights, any attacks on the guards. And then you look at the way that we do the Philadelphia model here. and
Yep.
recidivism is through the roof. I mean, the prisoners are killing each other. They're killing prison guards. I mean, it's awful. And I think the problem is to your point, the Americans still look at prisoners as air quotes bad people. And there are
Yep.
some, of course, but the rest of them, they're just you and I that have had a different upbringing and made different decisions. And I
Yep.
love that altruistic Norwegian model because it's not being soft. It's just
Yes.
simply figuring out what actually works.
Yes. Yeah. And I have not heard that. And I think I'm a big fan of that. It makes sense. I mean, think about you lock anybody in any confined space. I mean, it creates sociopaths, right? Yeah. You want folks that you can reintroduce. That kind of makes sense. I like that a lot. And further, it continually grants even those folks, even while they're being punished, it grants them ownership and responsibility. And a sense of community. Like, if you're in solitary confinement, you can do anything you want. You're not going to affect anybody else. But when you're living even in that isolated community, what you do still impacts other people. And that's, the vast majority of human beings have, empathy, which is great. I'm a fan of that, man. I don't know. We're not near that mindset, that progressive mindset here. And I like that a lot.
Well, his name's Tom Eberhardt, and I know there are correction establishments in the Pacific Northwest that have actually been modeling that and kind of moving towards that way. But if you take a step back, one would argue that a lot of the holy books talk about kindness, compassion, forgiveness, community service. So if we are a nation built on faiths like that, then maybe we need to lean back into that a little bit more.
Yes, no, that's great. That's great. No, I like that, man. I'll read about him. Like I said, I'm a big reader, so I'll dig into that for sure.
I'll send you the first episode that we did. We've done a few now, but yeah, it was really amazing. Well, then you mentioned crack. So what was on the street at that time when you were coming in late 1900s?
Yeah, we dealt with a lot. So look, snapshot of the last 25 years. Crack, a lot of crack cocaine. Then our city, for whatever reason, has never gone never seen overboard with crack cocaine, but we did. Crack cocaine was the big deal. Meth, we started seeing meth and homemade meth in the early 2000s, especially when all the information got out about, one pot cooking method for methamphetamines. We'd see, hotel rooms exploding because folks were inside trying to cook up their own pots of meth. That's when they started regulating pseudoephedrine here in the States because that's a precursor to build meth. So that we went through all of that. But I'll tell you, man, this is interesting. As far as we're talking about specifically drugs, so here in Vice Narcotics in 2026 in Greensboro, we are primarily dealing with cocaine and meth. Those are the two big drugs that the traffickers that we target. That's the ones that we're going after. But what's interesting, and this goes, people don't understand this, particularly local politicians. And I'm under no reason to believe that marijuana won't be legal here in the state in the next 5 years. I think it will. It's legal in Virginia right now. It's legal in more than half the states, and that's the way that it's going. And so what happens though? The problem is a lot of politicians will call marijuana. They'll say, oh, it's a nonviolent drug, right? It's not attached to violence. In our city and in a lot of cities, the vast majority of targeted gang-related violence in our city is young gangbangers shooting each other over weed, over a pound of weed, 2 pounds of weed, like small amounts of marijuana. These guys get into the gang lifestyle and they advertise that they've got I got the gas, which means I've got the marijuana. Where, let me pull up, let me show up wherever you're at. And so they advertise, online that they've got these pound or 2 pounds of marijuana, a couple $1,000s worth of marijuana, and then they're shooting each other. Like a lot of the violence is based around the marijuana sale. So it's interesting. We're constantly dealing with that. Again, we don't deal with a lot of marijuana trafficking in this division, but we do sometimes. But a lot of the violence is driven by weed sales, which people don't. A lot of times, people are surprised to hear that.
When states have made the shift, are they seeing, once it's legalized, once you can access it pretty easily, a reduction in that being a currency that's killed over?
Well, you always trade a problem for another problem, right? Colorado was the first I think the first statewide that legalized marijuana. And, they did it primarily for revenue, for tax revenue. And they the tax is ridiculous. It's a 20% sales tax on marijuana. So what you have, that will always drive up the price, which will always make it will maintain a black market for the same product as long as it's cheaper. And then further, think about how silly this is. Politicians said, "Oh, we can make a great amount of tax revenue by taxing those who sell and buy marijuana." Well, those are probably not the most responsible people anyway. And so what they have is a lot of folks not paying those taxes. Having a tax and collecting a tax is two different things. So again, you'll trade a problem for a problem. Right now, where I sit right now, you could drive 25 minutes north to Danville, Virginia, and get legal THC gummies. You can get legal weed there, and then you drive back across the border and it's illegal. It is a real problem now, but you're always going to trade one problem or one challenge for another. Human beings have insatiable appetites, which drive addiction. So I don't know what the solution is, but we're at a weird spot right now.
Well, what's interesting, I think we talked about this when we spoke a few weeks ago. I've told this story many times on here, but I'll give you the precursor. My mom and my brother moved to Portugal like 25 years ago. And when I started the podcast, like, I don't know, a year or two into it, she said, "Hey, did you know what they did with drug criminalization here? Drug decriminalization here?" And I said, "No." I said, "They had this massive opioid crisis in Portugal. And one of the Portuguese colonies had some sort of war. They sent a load of Portuguese soldiers out there, and it's not a big country, so it's probably a large percentage of their young men. And they came back, and there was this massive heroin addiction at that point. And so at a certain time, they were like the highest level of addiction. I think it was either Europe or the world, one of the two. And wow. Portugal is kind of looked down on by a lot of the, Spain's and Italy's and some of these other countries. But at its core, it really has a lot of solutions, because a lot of solutions really we had until industry and greed kind of undid a lot of these good solutions. And so they had a referendum to the country. Like, look, we tried the lock 'em up model of America and it's not working. We want to put these addicts into the hands of the medical community, and we're going to have free drug counseling, mental health counseling, job creation, housing, and get these addicts back on their feet. So then they're paying taxes and they're functioning members of society. And they had a vote. It was there were more people for than against, but it was not a complete landslide. And I think within the first couple of years, it was so successful, even the political opponents were all on board for this model. And in less than 10 years, about 8 years, they went to the lowest addiction rate in Europe, if not the world. I forget which. And now it's held as a national, international model. Like around the world, you talk about the model for overcoming addiction. It's that. But what they did, back to your point a minute ago about seeing people as people, rather than looking at the crimes and the criminals, they looked at the person who was the user, supply and demand. And if we get the user better, then we cut the head off the snake and there's barely any demand for these illicit drugs. And then we decriminalize them. We don't legalize them. So it's not meth on the supermarket shelves. But if you get caught with the user's amount, you get an education on what's available for you, not an incrimination with a criminal record that then makes your ability to rent an apartment or get a job even worse. That vicious cycle that a lot of our addicts go into. So again, another country around the world that has a great solution to our problem, because like you said, you trade weed for meth or meth for opioids or whatever, it's still the same revolving door, but you fix the people that are demanding the product, and now there's a low demand, and then the few that you can't get off, you surround them in the medical community with centers they go to get their drugs so they don't die in an alley somewhere. And it's the biggest success on planet Earth when it comes to reversing the opioid crisis.
I think that's super encouraging and interesting, because I think one of our downfalls in our profession is we don't put enough I don't think we put enough hope in people. A lot of times we think, if you give folks access to all of this, they're going to self-destruct. Well, no, I think the vast majority of people don't want to live a life of, addiction and poverty and being, having to be on the dole or on the government take or begging for money. You don't want that. So there are, like you've seen, James, you can't save everybody. There are truly some folks that are going to self-destruct, but I think they're a far smaller minority than the vast majority are, again, just, the guy that had knee surgery and got, his oxy pills finally ran out and he still needed that fix. And then, like you said, and then it spirals down. Then he's caught with, a bundle of heroin and, and again, it can truly spiral down. But the vast majority of people don't want that. So let's equip them. I think that's a very encouraging model. I disagree with a lot of the mindsets often coming out of Europe sometimes politically, but that's pretty forward thinking, and it gives a lot of grace and weight and responsibility back to the folks, which I always will value for sure.
Another country, Finland, what they've done with education, they treat the child holistically, and they don't punish a school for low grades. They support the school with low grades, because that's usually, children who maybe their households aren't as supportive. So the school is where they go for their food and their education and maybe even love. So they look at the holistic child rather than a standardized testing score. So, every country, Japan, there's so many other places that have great solutions. America, there's lots of things that we do well. But it's that, rising tide lifts all ships. You've got to have the humility to say, hey, other country or other state, you seem to be doing this really well. Can you show us how you're doing it? And we can figure out, well, how would that apply in the US? We're different countries, but we're all human beings. So it's not that different.
Yeah, that's right. The American education system, you read back on it, it was effectively created to create a good worker. Think factory worker, think 8 hour a day shift worker. The idea, my wife and I have 3 kids. The idea that my 12-year-old son at that point would go into school for 8 hours a day and sitting still and being, it's not good for morale. I don't think it's overall good for, just enjoyment and education, which should go together. It's something that's, I think, far overdue for us to reevaluate. And again, I'm speaking like I know anything. I don't know. I'm a cop. I don't know stuff, but I can have an opinion, and that's okay. And especially now we're about a week and a half from the end of school for the summer break for my kids. And like you said, the end of grade tests are over. And they're going to school and watching movies and playing games. And I'm like, why are we going? Can we just stay home and have fun and work? It's over. It's over for the year. Call it. So, yeah, I agree, man. It's fun, man. It's fun. I appreciate you asking these heady questions. A lot of times I'll do, police podcasts, and I just talk about police stuff. This is great.
Well, you said I'm just a dumb cop, but you see, I disagree. And I think I wrote a book about a year and a half ago now, and I'm trying to get a TV show created from it, because in your profession, it's either the hero cop or the villain cop, but it's a very two-dimensional running around, with the chest harness and, the usual shit that we get. And, obviously there is The Wire and some phenomenal shows that did it properly, but we're talking 20 plus years ago now. And then my profession, we're either a bunch of models running around saving everyone, or a bunch of buffoons that can't even tie our shoelaces, and we're not represented properly. But the most important part is the way that you and I actually see the world.
Yes,
because it's the most raw, honest perception of how a country is actually doing. Because you've seen everything from the trauma in the poorest areas to some of the insidious behavior in the rich areas. And, this is how we see it. So I think the value, there's a huge amount of value in the firefighter, the police officer, the paramedic, the corrections officer, the dispatcher, and how we see the world. So yes, you have these bigger, more well-paid people on the podium, whether they're the chief of police or the politician or the president. But to me, we're missing some of the most valuable voices, and we're seeing it, like The Pit, for example, gave a great perspective on the ER. But, the men and women on the streets that are the last hope for so many people when they push 3 numbers on a phone, these are the voices that I feel people need to be listening to.
No, that's a good point. And what you say, I've said this for a long time, I, folks that do what we do in a city, I know this city in a different way than folks that don't do this job will know. Like I've sweated and bled on these streets. Like I know, like you said, I've seen the best, I've seen the worst. I always think there's a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he equated policing. He said it's a riotous excursion with privileged glimpses into the human heart. And that's the same way in fire service, right? I mean, you see things. That's the reason they make movies about our professions. You get access, you get behind the curtains, you see it's a great ride, and you see what fuels the human heart. You see what destroys it. Like it's powerful information, but it makes for just a really great overall view of what's going on. That's why I like these conversations. And I was speaking with one of our assistant city managers the other day, and telling him kind of the same stuff. Like, look, pal, me and my buddies, like we know this place. Like we can speak with a certain gravitas because we've paid in intangibles here in the city. And so, my opinion, I'll give it to you, if you ask.
What about the opioid crisis? That, West Virginia, Ohio, some of these other areas were huge hotspots where I was living, where all the pill mills were that were, supplying a lot of that. What was your view in Greensboro?
Yeah, so we watched it just like everybody. For an example, at a height about, I guess it was 4 years ago. I think it was 2021. We had our record highest homicide year in Greensboro at 44 homicides, which was far over the national average. It was a very violent year. Typically, we had been in the upper 20s, maybe 30, but that year went nuts. We had 44 homicides. Everybody talked about that. That was a big deal. Like, what is going on? The whole thing's falling apart. In the same year, we had close to 150 overdose deaths, which were almost exclusively opioids, and nobody talked about that. And it's a travesty of like galactic proportions that, it's not sexy. It's politically tied. You want to read a book that'll get you dialed in, Empire of Pain, about the Sackler family and just where that originated from. It'll make you angry where you can't even sleep. And so we experienced that too, man. I tell you, like I was a watch commander. So I was a lieutenant at that point. I was a watch commander. So effectively, every police department will have a watch commander on duty all night long. And you're the highest ranking officer in the city. You're in charge of all the patrol functions. You operate with the authority of the chief of police through the night. Like, it's a very fun job. You get to see everything that's going on. But I got sick and tired of going to overdose deaths of 20-year-olds, 22-year-olds, 25-year-olds who are toying around with some of these opioids, and then toying around, of course, the jump over to heroin. I'll never forget one particular night. I was driving through town as a watch commander, and a call of an overdose at a McDonald's went out, and I was right around the corner. So I ran inside, got there first. The gal was in the female bathroom. I went in there, got through the door. She was effectively dead. I mean, she was already laid out. She was not breathing. She was turning. She was pretty blue. I remember I grabbed her by the ankles and pulled her over the tile floor out into the sink area so I could have room to Narcan her or do CPR because there wasn't enough space by the toilet. And I'll never forget, when I grabbed her ankles, her skin didn't retract. Like it operated, it was like Play-Doh, which I thought was she's done. And so I pulled her out, Narcaned her nasally. It didn't work. The firefighters got there and gave her the IV Narcan, which brought her back, which is always wild to watch somebody who's dead just sit up and come back to life. And she was a 22-year-old college student from a very, very, nice area, nice family. And I remember telling her, I told her after they discharged her, they treated her on scene. And she had come to that McDonald's with another friend to get high. And when this girl went down, her friend fled and left her to die in a McDonald's bathroom. And I remember telling her that. And I told her, I said, look, friend, I hate what you're into. I said, if you want to, I would have no problem. You can come to the station tomorrow and I'll show you my body camera. I'll show you yourself dead. Like, if that's what it would take to get you off something like this, I'll give you an opportunity that almost nobody gets. I'll show you yourself dead. And she said, you'd show me that? I said, yes, it's just you. And if it would help, like, please take us up on it. And I never heard from her. She never called and never came back. But you think about that and think again, like we were talking earlier, about how we're all the same. And man, that could be, a rough surgery where I get on, fentanyl or something like that, medical use fentanyl, and then you get addicted, and that could be us, right? And so it's nuts how that crisis hit everybody, and nobody talked about it.
I remember even when I worked for Orange County, which is the county that Orlando's in. I use Narcan so many times, but I remember one of my medic partners was a Navy corpsman in Afghanistan, so he was big on the EJs. Now a lot of addicts, obviously, their other veins are all shot to pieces, but if you get them in a certain position, you can get a vein in the neck. And it was in a Dunkin' Donuts, and again, she was breathing, like twice a minute, so basically a few breaths from death. And ended up getting an EJ and woke her up. And, like you hear a lot of medics report, then they're pissed off because you took away their high. But that was probably, God, 08, well, maybe a little bit later than that. Sorry, about 10 or 11, 2010 or 11.
Wow.
But then you just see it worse and worse. And then I've had people attached to the Sackler case on the show. One of the lawyers that was the one that took him to court, for example. Rick Mountcastle was just on here. And you hear about the predatory behavior. And my ex worked for a physician, and she said, after a few weeks, it's so weird. We get these people coming from all over the country, and he's writing these prescriptions, and then they go back to New Jersey or Ohio or whatever. And luckily, she had a really bad feeling, got out of there. And it was only literally a few weeks before they all came down on the pill mills and all the other people. And obviously, that's what that guy was doing. But you look at the backstory of how they absolutely lied, how they preyed on the doctors, how they found places that were struggling already, where industry had left that city or that county, and they knew exactly what they were doing. And then the FDA, is approving this drug.
Yes.
And, it just goes to show, and here we are now, as we sit and talk, we still lose 100,000 Americans to the opioid crisis. Crazy. Yet where's the conversation? Where are the solutions? Where are the people being held accountable? Because the Sackler family are living in mansions as we speak today.
Yes, and their names are still on a few buildings and monuments and different. And you read that, and it's almost. I remember finishing that book, and I almost was thinking, like, I wish I didn't have this information, because I got to go and deal with these overdoses, and it makes you 50 times more angry. I remember. About 6 months ago here in Vice, we did a raid on a house, heroin and psilocybin and different things that we were getting out of the house, and it turned out to be they had a back bedroom with a user, a particularly bad user couple, male female, and I remember going in the house originally, and it was low light, and so I was getting my eyes working, and we came into their bedroom, which was just an abysmal scene. It was a double bed, so a two-person bed with a nightstand on either side. I'll never forget this. And when I first glanced at the bed, I thought in low light, I thought it was like a leopard print sheet is what it looked like. And then we lit up the room, and it was a white sheet with blood stains all over it, all over the place. And what we found and what we determined on both nightstands, was heroin and intravenous Narcan on both nightstands. So what they would do all day, they would lay there together. One of them would get high while the other stood watch with the Narcan. If that person didn't die, then the other partner would shoot up while they would watch over them. And that's what they did. And man, you see that, and then in your mind, you compare it, you contrast it against, all of the Sackler legacy. It again, there's evil in the world for sure.
And I think the problem is the old school mentality be like, yeah, but they were addicts, they were junkies. People aren't thinking that, no, that man and woman were once a little boy and a little girl in a preschool drawing with crayons, chasing a ball in the backyard. And never were they dreaming one day of becoming an addict, living under a bridge, selling their body for sex, being a gang member. And this is where there's this disconnect. And I'm sure, you've seen it just as much as I have. Oh, that was a bum. That was a hooker. That was a crackhead. No, they were human beings that now are doing this thing. And the moment we disconnect the human from the addiction or the affliction is when we lose that empathy and compassion.
Yeah, and you can't lose that. You lose the flesh and blood. Like you get too removed with stats and plans, and you forget, again, like you said, these are human beings. But a lot of people don't understand about opportunistic self behavior, right? You think about, there's all kinds of examples where you take away the opportunity, then a vast majority of folks don't do something, self-destructive. There's a documentary called The Bridge about the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, and how when they built it, suicides in San Francisco they jumped like 40%. And it's because everybody had an opportunity now that was easy to kill themselves. Another example is in your home country of England, the town gas used to be used as cooking gas, but it was lethal if you inhaled it. And a lot of people would suicide by inhaling the town gas in their apartments. And then they switched over to natural gas. Then it took away that opportunity. Suicides went down. So yeah, if we take away these means, a lot of times, then you save a lot of lives. But it's so, these medications are everywhere. I mean, they really are everywhere and easy to obtain.
Well, this is an interesting point you say that, because I remember when I was young, people would put their head in the stove, in the oven in England, and turn on the gas.
Can't do it. Yep.
But what's interesting with the suicide conversation in our professions differs between the cop and the firefighter is the firefighter doesn't have a means of execution strapped to their hip, but a cop does. Good. So when you have that perfect storm, and this is, I think, so important, I've just become so educated on all these contributing factors that get the person to that point of desperation, and it's a distorted mind by that point. Their reality is skewed, yes. And they literally think, I am a burden for the people I love, therefore I am actually courageously and selflessly going to remove myself because I'm the problem. Now, it's not actually right, but in that moment they believe that. But yes. You've got this perfect storm from unaddressed childhood trauma and sleep deprivation, organizational betrayal and relationship issues and finances and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And then you add in alcohol, which is the biggest kind of anesthetic to allow you to make that jump. And then for your community, well, I've got this thing, in my holster, there we go. And so it does make sense even for your community, because that's a split second, action that isn't an option if you don't have a gun strapped to your hip, but is obviously so tragically available for a lot of our men and women in law enforcement.
Yeah. And I don't know how do you deal with that? I don't know, but you're right. Like I'm 49 years old. I've been doing police work for 27 years. So, well more than half my life, I'm a man of the gun. Like that's part of my daily operation. I put on my clothes and I put on a gun, and that's part of it. Further, American society is just, we have all of our active assailants are gun related for the most part, because we just have it's so intrinsic to our culture. And so that's a real challenge. And this is coming from a guy, I've lost 2 pals in the line to suicide. And it's tough, man. And it's the idea that you take all of the things that you just mentioned and you ball them up and you drop them in your friends and relatives' laps and you leave exit stage left. Like that's tough, man. That's it's awful. But I don't know how to, somebody has to carry the sword, right? So I don't know what the solution is for that, for sure. I'll tell you what one solution is. This is interesting, and I'm not ever one to, I don't like to Monday morning quarterback, and I certainly don't like to, dig up ideas of folks long gone. However, I remember one of my pals who was on the job and suicided. I remember as soon as I got word of it, my first thought was I need to call all of his pals, his close pals. I wasn't super close with him, but I need to call his close buddies to console them and make sure they're okay. And I took my phone out and I started thinking, and I couldn't come up with any. And that was interesting. That was very interesting, right? So the point being, you have to be wise and very, very, very tactical in who you surround yourself with. But you have to surround yourself with folks that support your personal culture. It's very important because that stuff doesn't slip through so easily if you've got pals that you're bouncing stuff off of. In our professions, that's vital. That's day one. You should start building that culture and looking for other folks that share your culture and drawing them in. Build your tribe. It's very important.
Well, I think going back to the gun isn't the thing that we need to be removing from the police officer, of course, but it's now as we sit here in 2026, we really are starting to understand from all these great minds generations before us, and then now our community finally having the courage to have these mental health conversations. It's like, okay, well, sleep deprivation is a factor. All right, what can we do about the shifts? Organizational betrayal is about a factor. Well, okay, well, what can we do to support our police officers and get the right people in these positions of authority? You've got relationship issues. Well, again, if you've got a more well-rested police officer that's got more time in between shifts and has access to mental health counseling and maybe has even done some plant medicine therapy to address some of the things going on in his head, then now you're basically disassembling this Jenga tower now that we know what it's made of, and the fact that we're towing the line in law enforcement or in fire means that we probably have had some adversity when we were younger. Now, if you're lucky, you process that as you were going on. If you're unlucky, you shoved it down in a box and it reared its ugly head when you're 10 years into a career. So I think it's an exciting conversation if we have the humility and the courage to accept that it's a thing. And even, you said about psilocybin in that house, that some of these things that we were told were so awful are actually therapeutic for someone. MDMA, psilocybin, ibogaine. That now we can actually start reducing the likelihood of someone reaching for that gun on their hip, because you've got not just a healed police officer, but actually a more resilient one, because when they've worked through these issues, they're even better than they were before. They're more empathetic. They're more resilient.
Yeah, and it's I read a book last year called The Singing Trees that's all about MDMA, the use, the pharmaceutical use, psychological use of MDMA, ibogaine, DMT, ayahuasca, a lot of the peyote even. And there are, finally, the problem in our country, those are all Schedule I controlled narcotics, like federally prosecutable. And that, a lot of those legal decisions came in the 60s when we had a lot of paranoia about, the bad reactions to various narcotics. But, you've got conservative politicians even in the country now, like Rick Perry in Texas, who is pushing forth a lot of the use of particularly DMT, which is not a recreational narcotic like that. It's a big gun. It's a big one for big use. DMT use, ibogaine use to heal and erase, in a lot of cases, PTSD, significant trauma. And it's interesting. I mean, like you said, we don't know. But you got to ask the questions. Like, you have to be okay saying, look, maybe the last 50 years of our legislation was wrong. It has been before. Like, it could be. We could be wrong. Like, I say that all the time. People laugh. I say, look, this is my idea, but I've been wrong today. Like, I could be wrong right now, and I'm okay with that. But this is what I think. And so, it's kind of exciting. A lot of the case studies that I read about, particularly military, law enforcement, firefighter folks who have gone through it, getting healed, getting truly altered by some of these unique uses, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, I think as well, I've seen this literally in the fire service. People would tell me, well, is there science to show that this shorter work week, this healthier work week is actually healthy? I'm like, well, firstly, yes, in every profession but my own. And the question is, why has the fire service not been studying this? That's, question one. I'll leave that there. Right. But question two is like, well, okay, well, let's flip it around. You want the data of how it's not working? Look at the graveyards. Look at the hundreds of firefighters that we lose every year. That's not data enough for you. And it's the same with, children working in the factories in Victorian times. They were dying of cancers and, all kinds of amputations. And, and then one day someone said, hey, maybe we shouldn't put kids in factories. And then eventually people listened. And it's the same with drug prohibition. You look around the world, there's a lot of countries that don't have gangs, that barely have any homelessness, that barely have any sex workers. And I guarantee you that probably correlates with the way that they view addiction and mental health and some of these other things. So arresting your way out of addiction clearly doesn't work. We do have the data from that. So when we, have the humility to say this isn't working, which actually goes back to the 1930s with Harry Anslinger and the whole reefer madness thing. That's the origin story. So we're looking at 80 plus years. If it doesn't work, what are models around the world that are working, and how can we start leaning into those? And I think, thanks to the vets, and then obviously the MAPS before them, some of these great organizations that have been putting this front and center, people are realizing, okay, there's a difference between meth and black
Yes.
tar heroin and
Right.
psilocybin and MDMA when used therapeutically with psychotherapy. And now that we've
Yes,
got
that's
that
right.
nuance, now we can pull those two apart. You keep
Yes.
some away from the public still, but allow others to be used in a therapeutic element that, as you said, are healing the very people that were having to enforce the laws in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, even microdosing. A lot of folks talk about the microdosing of psilocybin and some of the, it's, again, we have a serious problem. Therefore, a serious, a serious solution is what's necessitated. So yeah, we got to look around. Yeah, you're right. You've mentioned sleep now twice, and I've talked about this for years too. It's the idea that, like, I like data and I like studies and I like PhD, research, double blind, placebo, studies to show that a certain thing is detrimental to the human body. But if you've ever worked third shift for any length of time, anytime over your 25th birthday, you recognize it's deleterious in every considerable way. And I've traveled the country teaching over the years, and I've got pals and commanders in all 4 time zones. And, I always ask them, like, what of the very few places that still either do like rotating shifts and that kind of thing, there's no reasoning for it. Like, I ask, why do y'all do that? You know why? Because police do that. It doesn't make sense for a crime fighting efficacy background. It doesn't make sense, certainly, for your physical health. You got to live like a vampire. We have to, sometimes I think we should make complex things complex, and some things are just simple, and that doesn't make sense. Yeah. It's interesting.
Well, with us, we're 24-hour shifts, and this extra 24 hours in between brings it down to a 42-hour work week, which is funny because 56 hours, firefighters would always say, well, we want to be paid the same as the cops in our city, our county. It's like, but you're not. You never were, because they work 14 hours less for the same pay. So that was a fallacy in itself. But then, the question is, so this is definitely going to help the fire service. We're seeing it already. But the question is now, how do we help your profession? And I think one of the problems with 12 hours, nights, days, or 8s, like you said, is the incentive is, well, there's more money if you work night shift in a lot of professions. And I think that's completely skewed. I think, and we're seeing this in the corporate space, where they've realized that 4-day work weeks are working incredibly well, and people are more efficient and more innovative, and they're healthier and happier. I think that if you are, a cop and you work day shift, then you get, the same salary as a night shift guys. But if you're day shift, you work a 40-hour week. If you're night shift, you work a 32-hour week for the same money. Because if you are going to, like you said, if you're going to degrade by working the nights when you should be asleep, then you need more rest and recovery. So rather than just pay, Kory to work himself into the ground, but he's got $2 more an hour, why not say, well, because you are working when everyone else should be sleeping, we need to, work in more rest and recovery for the night shift corrections officer, dispatcher, police officer, so that they can hopefully maximize their acuity. Because as we've seen so many times, a sleep-deprived officer could shoot a teenager who's reaching for a driving license, not a gun, in that split-second moment. So their performance is more important than the pay.
Yeah. And what gets lost in the conversation a lot of times is, and people that put these schedules together often don't think this, and I've preached this for at least a decade now. Honestly, if you just poll your folks, you can, I won't say you can please everybody, but you can please a far majority of folks, because young officers don't want to work during the day. It's not fun. Like fun police work, like fun, where they make movies and, all the action is at night. It's after dark. So the new guys to about, for the first 6 or 8 years, they want to work at night. And so you can give them that option. A lot of the guys that are 10 years plus that are veterans, they want to work during the day. You can accommodate most folks anyway and give them what they want, which is great. If you can give people what they want and they're more effective, everybody wins. Further, you constantly have new guys coming in to take those night shift spots. Then if you incentivize it to a degree, giving them an 8-hour less workload per week, that's excellent. I've told this for a long time. Like my agency, I will brag on my agency for our schedule. Since I've been here for 25 plus years, our schedule here in the city for patrol officers is 4 days on, 4 days off all year long. And they work a fixed shift. It doesn't rotate, of 11 hours. And so you have 4 shifts during the day. You're going to work half of the calendar year effectively because you're on 4, off 4. And you have a predictable schedule. Now, some of the, 4th shift graveyard is tough, but it's far better than having to pivot in 2 weeks and work day shift. So that's always been one of our big recruiting tips is listen to our schedule. You work half the year. That's kind of cool, even if you're working at night.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, then we kind of were talking about some of the challenges on the street. Let's segue to Run Well. So
yeah,
a lot of these young men and women, they're in this preschool, they're drawing with crayons and chasing the ball, and then a lot of them find themselves in certain environments and they're at the crossroads. And for you and I, some of these mentors sent us to the first responder profession. Some of these other young people in these communities are sent down. It's the gangbanger, it's the drug dealer, it's whoever that's now sending them down the path where they're the wrong side of the law. So. That's right. Mentorship to me is such an important part of this conversation. There's some great groups locally here that do like a firefighter mentorship. There's one in Orlando called the Give Team. Phenomenal group. So kind of talk to me about the origin story of Run Well and what you and your peers are doing now.
Yeah, it's great. I light up a little bit because I get excited talking about it. So Run Well is the brainchild of a sergeant here named Sergeant John Matthews. We just completed our 5th year of full-time Run Well, running throughout a whole school year. So about 6 years ago now, Coach Matthew, we call him Coach because he's kind of a coach, John Matthews got together a small group of us cops, and he said, look, I've got a vision for us, specifically cops and firefighters, to go into one of our local high schools and mentor young men. Right. So these are specifically male first responders that are, have a vision for something greater in the world. Right. Have a vision that these young men are future leaders and future family leaders and future bosses and future folks that will move the needle. And so let's go into the school and let's be there. Like, that's real important. We'll gather this group of young men, we'll challenge them, and we'll meet with them every week. So Run Well, we go into the school every single week, Monday afternoon from 4:30 to 6 p.m. We take the group through a very vigorous workout that progresses and gets tougher during the year with the end goal in mind. We work them out hard. For the most majority of them, it's the hardest thing they've ever done. I mean, pull-ups, push-ups, carrying each other, runs, a lot of pull-ups. And we work them out hard for about 45 minutes. We feed them Chick-fil-A towards the end of our time together, and we give them 5 to 7 minutes of a very digestible curriculum. I wrote a curriculum for Run Well early on that's 24 weeks long to equate with every year of the school, every week of the school year. And we teach on a different topic that's specific to healthy manhood all year long. So, early on, we tell them, look, how about this? Nobody's ever told you this. Week 1, life's hard. It's really, really hard. Don't let anybody ever sugarcoat you. It is really hard. And you're tougher than that. You can overcome it. That's important, both of those things. The second week, we teach them about identity and vision, right? We tell these young men things like, you are necessary. You specifically, if you don't operate to the top of your capability in life and take on as much responsibility as you can shoulder, there will be a hole in the world. There will be a family that's missing a leader. There will be a wife that's missing a valorous husband, right? There will be some calling that will get missed. You are needed. And we see these young men sit up taller. They've never been told these things. They've been told these things like, you're in the way, what are you doing? I'll clean up your room for you. Like they've been told stuff like this. We tell them, we have a vision for you. Like, trust us over this year. And then we teach throughout the year on honor, strength. I mean, we tell them it's not okay to be physically weak. That's not okay. Nobody says that, but it's not okay. You need to be capable. We teach them about finances. We teach them poetry. We go through If by Rudyard Kipling, and we digest it with them. They have never been exposed. Nobody reads poetry, but a lot of times what we consider rounded masculinity, we read poetry, right? We read some holy scriptures with them. But we get the buy-in because we're there. And the big deal for the mentors, there's 10 or 15 mentors, all that operate and fix their schedule to be there every week. We tell them all at the beginning, look, you're not going to dabble in this. You're going to be there. If you make this commitment, a lot of these young men have had dudes run out on them in life. We're not going to add to that. We're going to be there. we're going to tell them, I'll see you next Monday all year long. Right. And so we build that rapport. We get as much out of it as the kids do. And what's neat, man, the beginning of the year, we'll do some little cursory runs and we'll see some of these kids that have never pushed themselves hard because that's not fun. That's countercultural. We'll see them struggle to run a half a mile. At the end of the year, we work towards a big victory finish, which we'll rent a bus and we take the whole group to a Spartan race, to a 10K obstacle race. And you'll see these young men that could not run a half a mile at the beginning of the year. You'll see them smash a mud run, soaked, bleeding, hardest thing they've ever done, smiling, high-fiving. There's zero cost to entry at all. We operate the whole nonprofit is operated off private donations, so it costs all the kids zero. We buy them first-rate running shoes at the beginning of the year. We spend about $5,000 that day. We give them Runwell T-shirts and hats and swag and sweatshirts all year long. We brand them, right? We want them to go back into their school looking like a tribe. Like, hey, that's a Runwell T-shirt. You're with that group. Yeah, we're with that group. At the end of the year, we always give out a scholarship to one of our seniors. This year, a young man named Ryan Mendez is going on to Appalachian State University, and he won the $1,000 Runwell scholarship. We've taken our seniors in the past to a suit store and sized them for proper navy blue suits, and purchased all that for them and sent them into the world. We've given them leather briefcases to take into the world. We've had some of our seniors this year. One's going to the Naval Academy, a couple are going to college, a couple are going to a trade school, and so it's neat, man, to see. It's a very simple idea. It's older guys hanging out with younger guys, and that's it, with no promises. We tell them, look, we don't know everything about masculinity, but we know a whole lot more than you do. And we'll share our mistakes and we'll share our failures. And you don't have to bang your head on the same tree I did, right? You can learn from me. I'll be honest with you always. And by a couple weeks in, man, these kids, they see it. They see that, look, these dudes are honest. These dudes are professionals. They could be doing anything else with their 4:30 to 6 o'clock time. We all have families and kids and obligations, but they realize like they're choosing to be here with us. That's a big deal. Nobody does that. That's weird. That's countercultural. And so it's neat, man. I like speaking about it. I do some of the fundraising for it, and but just love casting that vision because we had one of our last chiefs, and he was talking to our mayor, and he was talking about Runwell, and he said it's one of the most potent ideas going on in Greensboro that nobody knows about because we don't talk about it. We're just there for the young guys. We don't care about the accolades, but it's a cool vision. Yeah, that's it.
The Give team I just talked about, they're based in Orlando, and it's kind of like a poor area in that particular part of town, and they do a lot of the mud runs, a lot of Spartans. I've had Joe DeSena on the show several times now, and they work with him alongside Operation Enduring Warrior as well. But there's also when you talk about running, there's a judge, Craig Mitchell, who kept seeing addicts kind of circling through his court over and over and over again, and he was an avid runner. And so he started the Skid Row Running Club, and he basically invited, these people that were in that area, Skid Row, to come run with him.
How about that?
And it was so successful that not only obviously you can imagine there's a lot of success stories as far as, people getting on their feet and then doing amazing things, but they even took the team and ran in different countries doing marathons. So whether you're still in high school or whether you're, a 30-year-old homeless addict, that being seen by someone saying, I care enough to put my wing around you, as it were. You still need to show up. You still need to do the work, but it's never too late. I mean, it's so beautiful. And there are so many examples of this, the local mentorship, like I said here, but this is what people need. Like, you can't just sit and bitch at the TV and roll your eyes and say kids these days, because we're the generation that raised those kids. So therefore we have to be the mentors.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's a national pastime to talk about how bad things are. I'm like you. I dislike that. If you bring me a problem, give me what you want to do about it. Like, give me a solution. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but you're doing something. But it's, to think that this is going to be a global movement, or and we're expanding into a second high school this next calendar year. So the program's growing. We're publishing a field manual for the curriculum, which is neat. But we're under no illusion that this is going to be a global movement. But this is the way I think about it. We took 28, 29 young men to the mud run on May 3rd this year. In my mind, that's 23 or so future leaders, again, future husbands, future bosses, productive folks with a vision that believe that that know that they have the capability and they can bear up, they can bear their cross. Like we only win. America only wins when you're doing that in small segments. And so we hold up this corner. We trust other folks to hold up their corner in their area, and that's how you make things better.
There are people wearing your uniform, wearing my uniform, that talk about the recruitment crisis, and they go, well, the problem is kids these days don't want to work. I have seen complete opposite of that personally. Yes, of course, there are a lot of young people that would rather game whatever, but there were when we were young. It was a different gaming system. But I'm hearing from a lot of people that the young candidates that are really fired up for our professions are in incredible shape. They're doing the work. They understand the physical health, the mental health, the emotional health. Family is important to them, so they're coming in with a much healthier mindset. But with you having this mentorship kind of, perspective as well, what are you seeing as far as the future police officers of America? Are you doomed because kids don't want to work, they all want to be YouTubers, or is that rhetoric naive and ignorant?
Yeah, that's silly. I was a lieutenant in recruiting up till a couple of years ago, and I loved it. I didn't know how I would like that job, but I loved it. And I think primarily because I legitimately love this job. It's easy to talk about. And what I found was this. This is the advantage. It is very rare to go up to a young man. Like I would just see young men doing DoorDash deliveries at 22 years old that was their work. And they'd be going shopping for somebody else making $60 a trip. And I would catch these folks all the time. And I'd say, hey, look, you ever thought about being a cop? And the neat thing about that question is almost everybody's thought about being a cop. Same way with a firefighter. You ever thought about it? Almost every folks that you're going to run into will say, well, yeah, I thought about it. And then I would talk to them for, a guy who's doing DoorDash again. I would see these guys, or landscapers who are hustling and working hard and used to a team environment. Or, in our city, we got a couple Division III colleges, and I'd go speak to the athletics department. These are kids that are used to a team environment. They're used to working hard. They're not going to go pro, and they want something fulfilling, and they want to be here in town. And I tell them, look, it's 7 months of academy. We pay you from day one with full benefits, like you're working the street, and then you work 4 days on, 4 days off all year. And further, you do the job that everybody wants. I mean, Ice-T made a song called Cop Killer years ago, but he's made millions of dollars playing a cop. Everybody wants this job, right? And I would tell these young men, look, you can do it. And they would, they'd question themselves because nobody ever said, would you like to do this? And I would tell them, look, can you solve problems? Can you just talk to people and solve problems? Yeah, you're doing it and doing DoorDash. It's just solving problems. That's all you're doing, right? And we'll teach you to drive fast and shoot and all that cool stuff too. But you're just solving problems. You can do that. I've recruited a ton of guys just with that conversation. And I tell them, what are you going to lose? You do it for 5 years, you dislike it. I bet you have 5 years of cool stories and you'll be paid properly. Like that's pretty neat. So with recruiting, a lot of people think with recruiting, you want to build this message that appeals to the most people, and that is ridiculous. That's dumb. That's a waste of time. You think about the U.S. Marine Corps. The U.S. Marine Corps has had they have effectively had no vacancies forever, pretty much, because they're recruiting. If you look at the Marine Corps recruiting, they don't give two hoots about the folks that may be offended by their messaging. They don't care. They only build it to attract the people they're looking for. So what do they want? They want assertive, aggressive decision makers, folks that like excitement, folks that are physical, and they build their recruiting message around that. And it puts some people off, but they don't care. Like Teddy Roosevelt said, the critic truly does not count. I don't care. So when you build a police message or a fire message, I always would recommend, don't think for 2 seconds on who your messaging may offend, because they're not the people you want to work with anyway. If somebody's offended by a social media post, heaven knows you don't want to be on a squad or on a truck with them. That's for sure. I want to build a very succinct message, right, for folks that I want. I want the decision makers. I want the ones that can carry a heavy load. I want the ones that can make decisions and will work hard. And I'd build my message directly against that. And those kids are out there. The remnant is alive and well. You just got to go find them. That's it.
You nailed it with the offensive thing too, because my favorite, crew, no disrespect to the other crews I had, but the one that, I would hold as the highest bar that I was held to was my truck company in Anaheim. And
Uh-huh.
my captain was a kind of redheaded, white American. My engineer was
Yep.
like 250-pound bald Mexican American.
Great.
My
Yep.
truck partner was South African and I was British. So you can imagine the racial
Oh,
slurs
wow.
that went around the
That's great.
headset and that. But again, it was
Yeah.
all from love. And these men were also beside me 10 years later on the other side of the country when I got married. So
How
it's
about that? Think about that. That's
exactly.
great.
So if it's coming from love, it's all intention. But yeah, this is not a profession that you need to be ultra sensitive. But you talk
Yeah.
about the Marines, the Royal Marines, when I was young, had a TV commercial and it said 99% of the population need not apply. And what that does is for that one guy or one girl say, oh, really? Hold
Yeah,
my
I'm all
beer.
in.
And that's
Yeah, I'm
exactly who
all in.
you want showing up.
That's right. I watched we used to go to all the recruiting fairs and I would watch, and I thought we were pretty good at it because I like talking about this profession. But the Marines would here at this particular fair brought a pull-up bar. They had it in there. And they would, nobody can do pull-ups other than me and you probably. I like doing pull-ups and it's a superpower because nobody can do pull-ups. And it's a test of, strength. But they put that thing up and they would challenge all these young guys going by. And I watched them. There was a group of dudes coming by who were intimidated by the bar, but they didn't want to all pass by it. I remember one of the Marines said, "What about you, guy? Come over here and knock out a couple pull-ups." And the kid says, "Oh, I don't know about that." And the Marine said, he said something to the effect of, "I respect a man who knows his limitations." And I'm like, oh gosh, that kid's going to get on that bar. That kid jumped up on and did like 5 or 6 dead hang perfect pull-ups. And then his friends jumped up there. I'm like, that was a pretty savvy move. I like that.
Yeah, that reverse
Yeah, a little
psychology.
challenge. That's right. That was great. I'll take that. I'll put that in my back pocket for later. I remember thinking that was pretty slick.
Well, the advantage that my profession has is the reason why we have a recruitment crisis, again, kind of like the suicide thing, we can identify the issues. And
Yes.
the work week, putting fitness standards back in, access to mental health tools, obviously creating a good culture, realism in training. These are really actionable building blocks that we can put back in place. When I was getting
That's right.
hired, no one, we didn't even know how much we were getting paid. You were just begging for a
Nope.
job against thousands of other people. So when you got hired,
That's right.
you didn't say a word, you just went. Now we
Right.
realize that, that's not the healthy way of doing it either. But
Yeah.
fixing those, there's still a desire to be a firefighter. There's not really much negative stigma against, someone in the fire service or someone in EMS. In the law
Yep.
enforcement side, especially 2020, there have been
Yep.
some stumbling blocks as far as, optics, lack of support from certain groups. So
Yep.
talk to me about that. Without loading the question, that's a factor. What was
Yep.
recruitment like when you entered the law enforcement side? What have been some of the factors that have contributed to your, downward spiral in the profession as a whole, as far as recruitment, retention? And King,
Yep.
for a day, what do we need to change so that law enforcement can start attracting hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates again, and you too can
Yep.
choose from the top tier?
Yeah. So 2020, yeah, honestly, 2014 with Ferguson up to 2020 with the George Floyd overdose death and all that. So that was, yeah, it was challenging times. But, I continually told any team that I was with, I would tell them, look, all that is on, like, it's online. It's all the invective is online. Very rarely are you out in uniform and people just start screaming at you and throwing bottles at you just on a typical day. I've always told my folks, get out and rub elbows with the people. The people. I was a bike cop down here for a couple of years in the downtown district, and that was great because you were continually out of the car and you were rubbing elbows with clear thinking, job having, employed just citizens. And what you get constantly is, hey guys, thank you for your service. We know it's been a rough couple of years, but we appreciate it. And you get that over and over. And that's real. Like, that's a real person with a real opinion. The social media is like a megaphone. Like, anybody can buy one. They're very cheap and you can yell. Like, it doesn't mean you're valid. It doesn't mean your opinion is valid. But when you have a young generation of cops coming up where their whole narrative for their day is formed from social media, I mean, we call it a feed. Think about that. Think about how terrifying that is. What is your feed? What are you feeding your mind? And they see this all day and all night, and then they come to work. they have the misconception that the world is against them. And it's really not. It's a small minority of loud, mostly obnoxious, ignorant folks that are ungrateful, just ungrateful people, which are typically unreasonable folks. And so I tell young guys all the time, rub elbows with real people, like get out and make connections. You'd be surprised. It is overwhelming, the gratitude, the thanks that you'll get. And you can put that in your pocket for later, because that is real. That's actually real. So what to do if I was king for a day? I would say kind of just that, is that, and this is hard to say, like telling the young folks to get off social media. I understand it's like blowing into a hurricane. They're not going to do that. But I'll say from my personal experience, I have zero footprint on social media, and it's been a healthy thing for me. I want to know what real people are saying. It's truly not the critic. The critic does not count. It's the man in the arena that carries the weight and bears the responsibility. But it has been a challenging time. I'll tell you a couple instances. Around 2020, 2021, I was a watch commander, like I mentioned earlier, during the riots. So during especially first 3 or 4 nights when our city was actually and metaphorically on fire, structures burning down, our cops getting shot at, right? People, bottles, rocks. Like you really thought it's over. The American experiment is over. But what was neat is I would see the next day, the young folks who were sunburnt, tired, worked 17 hours. Some of them slept at the headquarters buildings. But every day they came back, every day without fail. And you see that, and that's what gives you great hope for the future. You're like, again, is the remnant alive and well? Are the people with the right spirit? This is a calling, like vocation, from the Latin voca, for voice, for calling. This is not a job. This is a calling, right? And they're coming back. And these people still exist. And I'm old at 49, but I'm watching these 22-year-olds face that and then come back. You think about a typical, think about a car salesman, any given dude that sells something. And think about if he got a call to the car dealership, and somebody says, "Hey pal, just so you know, tomorrow at the car dealership, there's going to be a fire. There's going to be a riot. People are going to be throwing bottles at you and screaming at you all day." That guy wouldn't come to work, because that's a normal person. That's a normal reaction. But we are attracting the folks in our house, in the police fire service, that they have a calling, right? It's super important. But I stopped, I was on a street crimes unit right around that time too. And we do car stops at night, and I would I remember several times stopping young black males by themselves, driving at night, driving erratically, whatever the stops were. We were always working high crime areas. So some of these guys turned out to be, in possession of stuff. Some were just guys driving through. And several times I would stop guys who were just maybe texting a girl and swerving. And we would have a, reasonable conversation. And we'd get down to, "Oh yeah, you were just texting that girl. I hope it works out. Look, have a good night." And these young men were so astounded that it was going like that I was, a washed up old white guy talking to a young black male, and I wasn't yelling. I didn't have my gun out. I wasn't, terrified and, and calling back up and, taking them to jail. And I would tell them all, I'd say, "Guys, listen, I'm going to be honest. If I can ask you a favor, because I'm not going to write you a citation, how about this? This is a good deal. Let me ask you a favor. Just tell this story, because this is real. What we're doing here, this encounter happens millions and millions of times all across the country in all 4 time zones. The 2 or 3 that go crazy are the ones you see. That's not real. That is statistically irrelevant. This is real. Just tell this story. Wherever you're going, if you get to meet that girl tonight, tell her how pleasant this conversation was. Will you do that?" Right? And they always thought that was a fair trade, but I had that conversation a lot because they had truly bought into the division of social media, that this was going to be contentious. And I'm like, "Yeah, look, it's cool. You're just swerving because you were texting somebody or you dropped your phone in the floor. Like, it's okay." Interesting conversations, man. And that's what you get. We've talked earlier about the opioid epidemic and how we forget about flesh and blood. These are just people talking to people. That's solving problems. That's all we were doing. It's been a challenging time, but we can carry a heavier load, which is great.
I think, and I've said this many times, what's extremely unfair when it comes to cases highlighted like that, and then people say, "Oh, they're wearing all this protective gear. They're going to war." No one is saying, "Well, why are our streets so dangerous?" and again, if you
Right.
look at Oslo, you look at, Lisbon in Portugal, you look at, Tokyo, they don't have this level of crime, and therefore their police officers are not, wearing tactical gear and, chest holsters and all these other things, because there's a necessity here, because people are trying to kill our police officers as well.
That's right.
So I want to be mindful of something that you wrote on LinkedIn not too long ago. You lost Michael Horan recently. So let's talk about that, the dangers to our police officers, and how this polarizing, whether it's drug prohibition laws or whether it's the rhetoric that's created such an anti-police message, results in deaths on both sides, including our men and women in uniform.
Yeah, I've mentioned it before, but since I started here in the agency, we went through like a 20-year period where we did not, we were just, it was just merciful. We did not have anybody lost in the line to violence, and particularly with malice. And I went through that for my first 20 years. And so in my experience, I had pals lost in other agencies, but in my experience, we got normed to that here at GPD. And then in December of 23, we had one of our beloved sergeants, Sergeant Dale Nix, got murdered. He was intervening in what he thought was a robbery off duty, and intervened, and a young man who was panicky shot him almost point blank and killed him. And that was a nuclear bomb for our agency. I mean, we, again, hadn't experienced it, nuclear bomb. We, like we all do, we trudged through that cathartic funeral, all of that, and cared for each other. And then merely 1 year later, in December 24, Officer Detective Michael Horan, who was one of my good pals, also a lifelong U.S. Coast Guard operator, one of the best trainers. He was a patrol guy in the middle of a Tuesday midday, sun shining outside. He got called to a man who might have a gun in a grocery store in a decent part of town. He went in uniform, and the guy effectively ambushed him and shot him, and then shot him multiple times while he was already down. Now, that was violence with true premeditated malice, and that hits at the human heart differently than just random violence or hazardous acts. And it was it drew up everything from Dale. It drew up everything from Mike, and we had to figure out how to deal with that, right? Of course, we went into the whole agency, the whole state went into manhunt mode immediately, and the guy was caught within about 3 hours, about 100 and some miles away, trying to flee to his mother's house, of course. But it was a challenge, man. And I was a boss at that point. As a boss, you have a certain responsibility to be honest, but also remember, like, you're leading. Even in this terrible situation, you have to, set some kind of tone, give some kind of direction, because it's a mess. And I remember what I came to. I told my folks on my teams, I said, look, whatever you're feeling, just know that that's okay, right? Everybody is different. Everybody is going to experience this differently. If you're feeling numb right now, that's okay. Just be honest. If you're feeling rage to the point that you're thinking about vengeance and crazy thoughts, be honest. Tell somebody else about that too, right? If you're truly just sad, like tell somebody about that. And the key of that is, community is putting community around you. We carry the burden that most professions don't carry. Right. I entered this profession. You entered your profession knowing full well, like that was part of your conditional offer. When you signed your job, you knew full well that you might lose one of your pals to some tragedy. Nobody does that. Nobody else. You don't become a linoleum salesman or even a doctor or anything else knowing that I'm going to lose a good pal before I end this career to violence or hazardous acts. Nobody does that. So it's not normal. And so the way you deal with that is in community. I mean, you have to trudge through that in community, and you think too, your calling is to be a protector, right? That's to be a protector. The guy that killed my buddy Mike Horan is a truly violent or is a truly evil person. And again, evil exists, but it's rare. But when you see it, you know it. From listening to his jail calls about almost gleefully how he shot him again while he was like, that's an evil person that we can't allow to exist in society. And so what my buddy Mike Horan did with his last minutes on earth is he ensured that person would be removed from society forever. and he will never get out of prison, and he likely might face the death penalty, and that's also part of the legal consequence. But Mike did that for us. Mike ensured that person was removed from society where me and my family go to that same grocery store. Like I don't have to be concerned with that evil person because he's been removed with Mike's sacrifice. But yeah, it's tough, man. It's not natural. Like it's good that our careers are merely 20, 25 or 30 years because you can't deal with that kind of trauma for much longer than that.
What, if any, was the motive for the ambush in the first place?
Mostly partly panic. It sounds like from some of his conversations, he thought he may have had a warrant of some type that the cop was showing up for him. Somebody had seen his gun. I think he wasn't overtly brandishing it, but somebody had seen it in the grocery store and called. But he bladed to Mike. He took a tactically advantaged position and shot him, and then continued to shoot him when he was down. And then the conversations on the phone with his mom and different folks later. Not to jeopardize any of the investigation, but they were evil conversations, some racist conversations, just really, again, evil things. You don't run into that often, mercifully, but when you do, you're grateful that it can be removed from society like that.
Going back to the Norwegian model, there was that one shooter that went into the summer camp and killed all the Norwegian teenagers. Yeah, and he lives in a box. So there's a place for people like that. And that's separate from the rehabilitation model of a lot of people. And some of those people had taken lives, but it was more, like you said, a crime of passion. And there's a victim and they're paying their penalty and they lost their freedom for a long time. But again, it wasn't a premeditated, evil, sociopathic act of murder like that one shooter. It was, the other 90 whatever percent.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's for, and again, I talk about that a lot. I still hear academics a lot of times arguing about that there's not evil. And it's just, I almost laugh. I mean, it's this kind of thing that I'm grateful they can operate in that sphere and think that. And it probably, if they knew what you and I knew, they would probably be, psychotic. And so it's probably a protective measure, but there is evil. Mercifully, it's rare, but it does exist.
Well, and this is what's interesting. People, when they think of evil, they think about the serial killer. They think about, the school shooter. But
yes,
going back to our previous conversation, and I've had conversations about this recently, even with Gabor Mate, we forget to look at the top too. And if you are the head of Purdue Pharma or William Morris Tobacco or a weapons manufacturer, and you sleep soundly being a millionaire or billionaire, whilst your product is literally killing hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the globe, you're evil. Yes. You're a sociopath because you could be making things that make the world better, but you choose not to. You choose to make these things that take lives. And so, it's not just, the scumbags on the streets, it's the scumbags in the suits as well.
Yeah, it's always disheartening what, people will they'll put a price tag on their soul, and your soul can be purchased, and you see that. And it's so sad, man, when you watch, it makes you angry when you watch folks sell their soul for, write the check, $2 billion. Will that buy your soul? Yeah, it did. In this case, that's, it makes you mad for sure. Absolutely. Righteously indignant, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to hit one more area, then we'll go to some closing questions. You've talked about, a full career, obviously, seen a lot, done a lot, lost friends, being exposed to riots, organizational betrayal, all kinds of different areas. What were the lows in your own mental health journey, and what have been the tools that have helped you get yourself out of those dark places?
Yeah. 2016, 17, when we had, Black Lives Matter was a national movement, some good folks involved, some bigoteers involved, some people profiting off of bigotry. Everybody's motives can be often diverse, but that was when I was a bike team sergeant. So I was in a much more vulnerable position because you're operating bike mounted all night. And we were tasked in our city, of course, with ensuring the safety and security of protests, which became a lot of times rowdy demonstrations where we're standing there ensuring the First Amendment right of 600 or 700 people who are screaming at us and calling us murderers and racists. And, psychologically, very, very challenging. During that summer, you had a guy at a Black Lives Matter rally in Dallas that ascended to the top of a parking deck and started shooting specifically bike cops in Dallas. That next night, we had a big rally here in town. And, my wife's she's a baller. She's a pro. She's been doing it. We grew up in the profession together. So she's steady. She's a steady hand. But that night I remember she said, "I don't want you to go to work. Like I'm anxious about it. I'm actually anxious about it." And I remember saying, I am too. Like this thing's this is bigger. We got to be out there. I don't have an option. I'm in charge. Further, I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in peaceable assembly and the free speech. I think we got a decent plan. I work with pros that we're going to mitigate the risks as much as possible. But yeah, I remember thinking like, I don't want to go. That's tough. And, we're a family of faith. We prayed together. She sent me off with that and asking me to check in every once in a while. And I remember for those couple of days, man, in and around that murder that happened in Dallas, that rampage murder, we were staffing these demonstrations that were always on the verge of getting out of control. And it was challenging. I remember being very emotionally tired. But it's one of those things that you end up, you just pay those dues. I mean, you recognize in the moment, like I don't have an option. Again, I've signed on to this. This is what I've asked for. But I have always, I've always said like, this is not a solo assignment. I will never say that anything that I've done has ever been solo. Like I lean heavily on a very small tribe of guys that have become my tribe that I trust intrinsically. And I share with them my worries and my thoughts, and they'll check me when I'm being a coward or a pansy, or when I'm being lazy. I'll call them and see what their workout was today, or what are you reading right now? I need a book recommendation. Am I being weak with this? Tell me the truth. And so share, even through a lot of those demonstrations, sharing, like when you share those thoughts and share those dark secrets that, that are haunting you, it takes a lot of the venom away. When you peel back the curtain and you just share it with one guy, hey, look, I'm struggling. Like I'm kind of fearful about going to work. Like it's such a relief to let that out. And further, you're effectively laying down your shield and being vulnerable with another guy. And only good stuff comes out of that. I mean, the only good things come out of that, so long as that's a trusted friend. So that's how we trudged through that. And we still talk about that though. Blair was, again, she'll recall that as the same, the kind of the low point of our journey together in this profession were those riots. Cause it was a wild time for sure. Yeah, tough.
Brilliant. All right. So I want to go to some closing questions. The first one I love to ask, is there a book or are there books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Yeah, great. I read all the time. I love it. When I tell people, a lot of times you ask people about books and they look at you like you got three eyes. Like, oh, people still read. Yeah, people still read. My tribe reads. My family at home, we're a reading family. One of the best leadership books in the last 5 or so years is a book called Call Sign Chaos by General Jim Mattis. It's excellent. I should have just dunked that book in a vat of highlighting ink because I highlighted and underlined the whole book. It's excellent. One that's great that doesn't get a lot of press is Colin Powell's autobiography. Particularly in there is his 13 Tenets for Life, which are just absolute gold. One of those is optimism is a force multiplier. I mean, you could run for mayor on that right now. It's just such a great idea. I'm going to look at my shelf. Extreme Ownership with Jocko and Leif Babin. That's an excellent book. I've met those guys. I bought that book in 2016 when it first came out. I've got one of the first editions. What else we got? I like anything. Ryan Holiday's written a lot of good books against ego and in support of courage. Those are always great. I tell folks, read biographies of leaders. Why would your career is not going to be long enough where you can figure out all of the mistakes and how to fix them. So read other folks' mistakes, borrow from their mistakes. Like I'll gladly borrow. I read Custer. I find I have a lot of similarities with General George Custer in being too flamboyant sometimes, being too optimistic, driving too hard. I mean, I've learned a lot from reading of him in Crazy Horse, and that was 170 years ago. But I can glean from that for sure. I read a little bit of fiction. I don't read a lot of fiction, but I like all the Jack Carr books. Those are all great. Let me give you one more because nobody ever asked this, so this is fun. That's probably good. That's probably good for now. I just finished. Pete Blaber was a Delta Force operator here in the United States Army, and he wrote a book on leadership based around the Pat Tillman disaster, where Pat Tillman, it was died by friendly fire, which sometimes is unavoidable. But it turns out there was a lot of leadership failures that led to that, and he wrote a whole autopsy of that case. And we can learn from bad behavior as well as we can learn from good behavior. Anything Pete Blaber has a trio of books about just common sense leadership, which are excellent. They're great. Those are recent finds. The last one just came out this past calendar year. Good question. I like that question.
Brilliant. No, great suggestions too. What about television, film, or documentaries that you love?
Good gracious. I help out. I guest host from time to time on a TV show called On Patrol Live on the Reels Network, which I like because they put live cameras in police cars in typically 8 different agencies in 3 or 4 different time zones on Friday and Saturday night from 9 to midnight, and they ride along with cops. And unlike the show cops, which the show cops is great, but you would have a camera crew ride with a cop for a week, and then they would cut out the most salacious, unreal, like wide open snippets and put it together for 21 minutes. And people would watch that and say, I could never be a cop. That's crazy. Like, it's wide open. That's way too dangerous. But On Patrol Live shows the real job, unfiltered, unedited, all the funny, all the boring, all the hilarious, all the dangerous. And so you get to see it all. And it's just really neat. So I'm a fan of that show. As far as cop shows, I'm a Blue Bloods fan until that ended a year and a half ago. That was a great show. Documentaries, I like, and they're all pretty, dark documentaries are good. I like Blackfish. I like Grizzly Man. I like the documentary called The Bridge that I mentioned earlier about the Golden Gate Bridge. I like I think most of what they have in common is I like learning. I enjoy learning. I don't do a lot of fiction, but I enjoy if I can watch something and learn something from it. That's always neat. That's a couple. We got three teenagers, man. We don't have I don't get a lot of sitting still time lately.
I've used cops as an example recently of, again, the ridiculousness of prohibition, because you talked obviously about marijuana. When you think back to how many episodes had like a full-on car chase and then a foot pursuit, then a fight, and then and there was like, one split, like one joint, that was it. And they're like, we got him, they cuff him and they throw him in the back. And now you look back and it's like, okay, that is literally, legal in most states and known to be very therapeutic. And I've never had a marijuana influenced fatal wreck in my whole career. But alcohol, is pretty much every single one. So it's an interesting kind of time capsule of, in a way, the ridiculousness of some of the prohibition laws that now, it shows really how far we have come. So now the last thing is obviously, okay, the next step is to, decriminalize and deconstruct some of these laws to where they are a spectrum. And, some of these are kept away from people completely, and some of these are actually used therapeutically. And then in the middle, maybe is, some that are scheduled, whatever. That's right.
Yeah, that's good. And it's interesting. Like, the 1920s, we did away with all the alcohol, then we brought it all back. And then, I think 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, raging, like drinking was a national pastime. But what you'll note now that we've had total freedom, there's a big movement now for responsible, disciplined, especially like men that are just getting off of it. They're like, look, I've had enough. I've seen it, what it's done, and I'm gonna be responsible. And a lot of guys cut it out completely. And it's interesting to watch the experiment kind of go full circle. Yeah.
I went to a rock festival called Welcome to Rockville in Daytona, and I was telling this to someone about a week ago. When you used to go, and it used to be in Jacksonville, hence the name. So we've been going for like 10 years now. The biggest line was always at the drinks counter. And that's where you'd have your, your ID bracelet and your tickets, and you wait for, like 5-10 minutes to get a beer. I just went this time. I did not see a single line in any of the beer counters or, alcohol
really?
counters. I swear. And it was amazing. Now, there was a lot of weed around. There's a lot of smell of skunk and that kind of thing. But And it was
How
phenomenal.
about
I
that?
didn't see a fight. Not that you saw a lot of that anyway, but there was like literally
Yeah.
two people the whole weekend that we were there. I can remember that looked like they were drunk, that needed to be carted off somewhere, but that was it. So what a
Wow.
beautiful reflection of exactly what you're talking about. That people
Yeah.
are getting away because criminalizing alcohol didn't work, which is the
Nope.
insanity of the drug prohibition. We just had an example of how it doesn't work, and then they go and jump into it again. But taking away, addressing some of the mental health stuff and then giving options that are basically less deadly, i.e., like you said,
That's right.
THC gummies or whatever, if that's what you need, or CBD, or even microdosing, or
Yes.
all these other therapeutic tools that are less
That's right.
demonized now. Lo and behold,
Yep.
people aren't drinking themselves to death. They're not wrapping their cars around a lamppost anymore. They're getting Ubers. They're starting to evolve. And to your point, because you're giving people the benefit of the doubt that most people are going to make a good choice if they're just given the environment to do so.
Yes. No, you're right. And we're trading up. We're trading for less deaths, less highway deaths, to maybe a little more stupor, maybe a little more, maybe a little more slurred conversation or naps. Like, that's pretty good trade. Maybe that's a good trade. But
I'm going to buy stocks in Doritos.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like you said, 15 years ago, or even just a few years ago, at that same environment, that would have been, people are just waiting in line to give you their $17 for 16 ounces of beer and press on. Yeah, that's encouraging, man. I'll take it.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the next question, is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Good question. Let me think. I mean, I'm not a big celebrity guy. I'm a real person guy. And I got pals that, again, I ask for counsel all the time that would be excellent on any podcast. And I like, one of my good buddies one of my best pals is Captain Anthony Price. That he's excellent. He's a couple years behind me in age. He's a captain here also, but he's got a very robust career. A dog handler, SWAT cop like me. We were SWAT cops together. We ran street crimes together, but just cares for his people well, is understated, is no nonsense, but, has his finger on the pulse. But there's heroes like that all over the place. I mean, I could go to almost any agency and you give me a couple of days, I can pick out who I would want to take counsel from. I don't rub elbows with a lot of famous folks. I am friends with Sean Larkin, who is, he was a Tulsa, Oklahoma police sergeant, and then he got one of the first guest TV spots on a show called Live PD, which was the precursor of On Patrol Live, now 10 years ago. But he's become just an ambassador. He's retiree now, but an ambassador for our profession. He has a couple shows on Fox. He's excellent. He's great. I could connect you guys, but he's just a real cop too. A lot of times you get folks speaking a lot and they're not real cops. I like to talk to folks who put handcuffs on lately. That's what I value.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's my yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's I know the draw for some people on podcasts or social media following and all that stuff. But to me, the celebrities I had on the show, it's not because they're a celebrity; they're a good person that happens to be a celebrity. So
Right.
just like you said, most of the most downloaded episodes aren't the Hollywood stars; they are the regular firefighter, regular cop with a powerful story that really resonates with people. So yeah,
well, your audience sees. That's good. Your audience sees through that, and that's good. Yeah, I always ask. This is not a popular question, but when I'm meeting a high commander or a commandant or something, I always ask, like, tell me about your career up to sergeant. That's all I want to know about. I don't want to know about the stuff beyond sergeant because that's all can be fluffed out. But what'd you do? Like when you were, just riding the truck, or when you were just a young cop, like what'd you do? Give me the first 10 years. That's all I want to know. And I can probably figure out kind of who you are. That's a fair question.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, then the final question before we make sure people know where to find you, what do you do to decompress?
Yep. So I don't, it's weird, man. Think about all the old police movies. You always had the stereotype of the nearly alcoholic, overstressed, overweight, carrying the weight of the world detective. I mean, those guys exist. But a lot of times the folks that are drawn into fire police service are born they're just made in a certain way where they can manage the heavy load more, easily, which is interesting. I've never experienced a lot of overwhelming stress, but I'll tell you this, one thing that's necessary for me, that if this doesn't happen, like my day is not going to kick off proper. And it's part of my, if I don't really like the self-care, that stuff can get a little bit gooey. But yeah, for self-care for myself, and I've done this for my whole career. If I don't start off the day with PT, it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be imbalanced. Sometimes because of early ops that we run, I have to change my schedule and run or work out in the afternoon. But typically, I mean, every day that I work, this is the way I've always done it. Every day that I work, whatever schedule, every day that I work, I'm working out every day. Most days, almost all days that I'm off, I'm probably not going to work out. That's been my balance. But I eat at this stage now that I have kind of a banker schedule. I eat with the family at home. They go to school, and I go either 3 days a week. I run a 5K on the trail, and 2 days a week I lift weights. And for me, or I lift, which for me is push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups. Like I'm in a prison. Like that's been my workout forever and ever, and it is super helpful. I've found like if I slay that lion early in the day, the rest of the day is probably easier than that. And I work out problems on the trail. I'm in nature. Like it's just great. There's a couple crushed gravel trails around city lakes, and you can feel like you're not in the city for a few minutes. And I've got one that I run every single day. So yeah, the workout is super important. If somebody said you can't do that anymore, I would deteriorate to a degree for sure.
Just going to the comment about some people are built for this, because I agree. What's interesting, and it goes back to the prohibition thing. When I first tested for a fire department, I did a test where it's one they send the results to a bunch of departments around the area, and Miami Beach were there, and it was a pre-app, and you're like, okay, well, be honest about what you've done. And I put down, okay, well, a few years ago I did this and this, and don't do it anymore, and to be honest, had a great time and didn't lose a job. And they screwed it up and threw it in my face, literally. And they're like, you're disqualified. And I'm like, okay, well, so now I've got to lie to be a firefighter. Okay, understood. And the reason I say that, ironically, the two things I had was MDMA and psilocybin, which was legal in Japan when I lived there, psilocybin. And now healing first responders. So there's the kind of full circle irony there.
That's
but
interesting.
The point being is there's this fallacy that to be a to be a good recruit, to be hireable, you've got to have this blank slate, choir boy upbringing, which is absolute bullshit. To be a good police officer or firefighter, I would argue you probably, if you've been through some stuff, that's a good thing. But the difference between being able to handle it and be able to not handle it later in our career is, has that been worked through? And I think there's a beautiful opportunity now, as we're really maturing in this kind of first responder mental health conversation, at the drill ground on day one, to say the fact that you're towing the line when 99% of the population wouldn't, means you've probably been through some things. Now, we're going to treat your mental health the same as your physical health. So we're going to PT your body, we're going to PT your mind, and give you X amount of counseling sessions, or down the road, maybe even say, okay, we have plant medicines and all kinds of avenues that you can go down. Because if left unaddressed, that will be a fracture to your foundation. But if we work through it, you will be a higher performing police officer, firefighter. So I think the difference between the people that can't and people, that can, you've got a section that just haven't been through hardship and therefore probably, aren't cut from the right cloth. But then you've been a lot of us that are, but there's these boxes locked in our mind that rear their ugly heads after a few years of sleep deprivation and trauma, etc. So I think forging the right kind of person and having that honest conversation at the front door, and then having continual mental health, counseling access, just like you would annual physical tests and that kind of thing. I think that would be a force multiplier in the mental health conversation.
Yeah, for sure. We used to fight that all in recruiting. We had a committee that would vote on who to give an offer to. And they always, they loved the 21-year-old with no credit score who lived in their parents' basement. And I always was like, you have no idea what you're going to get. You have no idea. I like the 27-year-old, 28-year-old with maybe a drinking in public charge, who's, had a couple wrecks, maybe he's been fired, maybe he's gotten, I like somebody who's rubbed up against life and has persevered through it. But like you said, James, I am fully prepared. I will always be fully prepared. Anybody that chooses to wear that shield, that fire or that police shield, I am fully prepared to give you the benefit of the doubt right out of the gate, just because you wear that shield. I think that's fair. You could judge me wrong by your behavior, but you choose to do that right now. I will 100% start with the benefit of the doubt for you.
Absolutely. I think we're missing a large section of great police officers, firefighters with some of these, ridiculous bars that are put in place. And then again, going back to the prohibition, drug addiction conversation, how many great firefighters, paramedics, police officers, doctors, nurses are we losing on the streets because of that? Yes. So there's, they say, well, how are we going to find these young people? Well, start helping some of these people heal. There's gang members that would probably be incredible accountants if they were just given the opportunity. Business people, they understand the philosophy, but instead of, black tar heroin, now it's, a coffee shop or whatever it is. So I think there's a really large untapped section of society if we kind of address some of these barriers to entry prior, and then mentorship, like you're talking about, with Runwell, where now all of a sudden someone that was doomed to be on the wrong side of the tracks is now wearing a uniform and is operating incredibly well because their upbringing became an asset.
Yeah, and you build the investment, and then, like you said, you care for the investment. I've told this story before. In 2001, I got involved in a shootout, got pinned down behind a police car, shot at for about 4 hours. The guy was in an elevated position, shot our police car to pieces. We had no options left. We were rescued out by the SWAT team. And then the guy, he suicided after they introduced gas into his house. And I got off at like noon instead of 7 a.m. and nobody ever talked about it. And I just came to work that next night. I'd slept for about 4 hours and I came to work and nobody ever talked about it. And now we offer counseling. Like when a young guy goes and has to watch a suicide scene, we offer him, look, here's some virtual counseling. You're not supposed to see that. A human being is not built to see the kind of carnage that we have to see. It's okay. Go talk to this guy. Let him know that sucks. It should suck. You're not supposed to see that. Let him help you digest it. So you care for your investment in these folks after. And I think mercifully, we're doing a much better job now. We're recognizing this stuff builds up like pressure. And you have to care for your investment. It's super important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, the very final question, if people do want to reach out to you, learn more about you, where are the best places online to do that?
LinkedIn. That's it. I have no social media footprint on the planet. The only thing I have on the open internet is articles and podcasts, stuff that I write. I do a lot of writing. I write for different police publications, Police One, Police Magazine. I've done writing for LA Times and different places, but I do a lot of conversations like this because they're just so enjoyable, like this one's been. But if you want to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn, and I make myself very available there. But social media, I don't exist. It's not my thing. Yeah, other than that.
Brilliant. Well, I want to thank you so much. I think especially, all the things that we've covered, but especially when it comes to the addiction crisis, prohibition laws, I've always said this. Yeah. Every one of my law enforcement guests, I'm in such admiration when they are speaking, out the way that you have and saying, hey, it's not working. And, you remove a dealer from the corner, you end up with a gunfight for the next dealer to be on the corner. And so being that voice, even though you were tasked with enforcing these very laws, I think the law enforcement voice is the most important in this conversation. So, not just to mention that, but all the other things, I want to thank you so much for such an incredible conversation and being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
That was great, James. I'll bookend with what I started with, man. I appreciate what you're doing to give voice to, I'm just a regular guy like a lot of your regular guests. I appreciate it very much. Thanks for cheerleading what we're doing. Thanks for taking. People don't realize what all it takes to put something like this together. So on top of all your other professional responsibilities, you do this. I think that's very cool, man. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.